Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Kevin Gavin. I'm absolutely delighted to be presenting for the LGFA Research Pod today. And the title of my research is going to be talking about is the contribution of Gaelic football participation to youth physical activity levels. Hopefully you enjoy it and you find it interesting. So just a little bit of background about me and my research team. I'm currently in my final year of my PhD and my two supervisors are Dr. Kieran Dowd and Dr. Aoife Lane. We're based in the Athlone Institute of Technology in the Department of Sport and Health Sciences. And recently within this department, the SHE research group has been developed. And the idea behind the SHE research group is to bridge the gender gap that is currently within research within the sport and health and exercise sciences. A lot of research has been done on males and boy athletes and not as much done on females. And we want to kind of bridge that gap and, aim our research more at females and girls. And recently I have actually just had my first publication within the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine. And again, it's the same title as my presentation today, The Contribution of Gaelic Football Participation to Youth Physical Activity Levels. And if you'd like to read that in more detail, feel free to follow up with me with an email or a tweet and I'm delighted to forward it to you. So again, as the title suggests, we're talking about physical activity levels and youth that play Gaelic football. Just give a little bit of background then on physical activity and I suppose the benefits of physical activity, or PA as we're going to kind of call it throughout this presentation. I suppose physical activity has a positive impact on bone health, positive impact on mental health. It also helps reduce the risk of developing obesity and maintaining a healthy body weight. It also improves the quantity and quality of sleep, and it improves coordination and motor skills. So it's a large amount of benefits there of being physically active. But how much activity do kids need to attain these health benefits? Well, just recently, actually just last week, the physical activity guidelines were published by the World Health Organization, so brand new guidelines, and they now recommend that youth achieve at the minimum 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity, or MVPA, across the week. So what we mean by MVPA is, or moderate physical activity, is the type of activity that leaves you out of breath, struggling to hold a conversation, you're getting a bit red in the face, you're starting to sweat that small bit as well. So that's what we describe as MVPA, and they need a full hour of that on average across the week. Finally then, if we look at what percentage of Irish youth are currently achieving the guidelines, well, we know that 17% of male and 9% of females are achieving the guidelines. And again, a quite worryingly low number both for males and females, but again, we're seeing a gender gap there with males being more physically active than their females counterparts. So how do we increase these low physical activity levels of Irish youth? And one of the ways that's been kind of promoted is through the use of sport. So we do know there's a lot of good sides to playing sport, and we'll talk through those, but there's also some kind of downsides in relation to physical activity levels, or the bad sides of it, and we'll talk through those as well. So for sport, the positives. We do know that it's extremely popular, playing sport is extremely popular for Irish adolescents, with 66% of males and 52% of females participating in at least one sport at least once a week. So it's really, really popular. Youth also who play sport are 2 to 6 times more likely to achieve the guidelines. And we also know that it's from Dr. Brona McGrain and her colleagues up in DCU, they found that playing sport has a protective effect against symptoms of depression and anxiety. So a really positive benefit there. On the bad side of things, despite being more physically active playing sport, we do know that 72 to 80% of youth who play sport still fail to meet the guidelines. So that's a bit of a worryingly high statistic there. Females are also less likely to meet the guidelines and have greater dropout rates than their male counterparts. And we also know that a large percentage of time during sport is spent in standing or low intensity activity. So research that examined the amount of activity during sports found that a large percentage of time is just spent standing around, not doing much. So that's kind of an interesting finding too. So that kind of led us to our research to find out, Gaelic football is the most popular sport among youth in Ireland. What exactly contribution does it make to these youth physical activity levels? So that's our first objective, is to determine the contribution of Gaelic football to youth daily physical activity levels. 2 was to determine the difference in physical activity levels between males and females. And 3 then was to determine if changes occur in physical activity levels across the season. So we looked at it pre-season to in-season or closer to championship, and we see if there's any changes there. So I suppose moving on to our methods then, or what did we actually exactly do for our study? We first recruited 160 participants. They were 87 males and 73 females, and these were taken from 3 age groups: under 14s, under 16s, under 18s, and they were taken from 3 local football teams around Westmeath and the Roscommon areas. And how we actually measured the physical activity levels then, we used a thing called an ActivePal activity monitor. And the ActivePal there is the little orange thing on your screen. It's only about the size of a matchbox, and it's a lot thinner than a matchbox, and it's able to be stuck to the player's legs, and they can keep it on for a full 7 to 10 days. It can be waterproof. They can wear it day in, day out when they go to bed, when they have a shower, and it gives you a really detailed output on the amount of activity they're doing in minutes per each day. So it'll give you an output on sitting and lying, how much time they spend sitting and lying, how much time they spend standing, how much time they spend in light intensity physical activity, or LIPA, and how much time they spent in MVPA, which is what we're most interested in for this study. And that gives you a measurement across the week. So it's a really, really accurate way to measure activity. So what we did for our study then is that I went out to these Gaelic football clubs, and I met with the players before a training session, and I gave them out these ActiPads, how to put it on, how to take it off, what to do if they had any problems with it. And we got them to wear it for a total of 7 days, so for a full 7 days. And during the 7-day measurement period, then we also got them to wear it for one training session and for one match, and we can compare then between the two. After the 7-day or the week-long period, I came back, I took back the ActiPads, downloaded the data, and analysed it then. And we did this at 2 time points, pre-season and in-season. So moving on to our results then. So for our results, what do we find for the pre-season? Well, first of all, what percentage of our participants were meeting the physical activity guidelines of 60 minutes of MVPA? And we found that males were more physically active than females, unfortunately, again, with males, 60% of males achieving the guidelines versus just 23% of females. So again, a quite worryingly large difference there between males and females, a quite big gender gap, 60% versus 23%. When we looked at the physical activity levels during Gaelic football, then we looked at a training session and a match, and we could compare between the two, and we also looked at it between males and females. So for a training session on its own first, we found that males spent 57% of time in MVPA, while females only spent 42% of time in MVPA during training sessions. Clearly there again, we can see that males are more physically active than their females. We looked at a match then, we found a similar finding, with males spending 63% of time in MVPA, while females spent 10% less, of 53% of time in MVPA during a match. And again, males are more physically active than females. What's also interesting, what we found was that both males and females weren't really training at match intensity. So if we looked at a match versus a training session for males, the males spend 57% of training in MVPA, while they spend more of 63% of match time in MVPA. We also found it for females, with 42% of time spent in MVPA during training sessions, while females spent 53% of time in matches in MVPA. So again, not really training at match intensity. We also then looked at the contribution of Gaelic football. So how we did this was we looked at a sports day and a non-sports day. So a sports day was a day that the players had a training session or a match that day, and non-sports day obviously was when they had no training sessions or matches. And we compared the two. And what we found was that on a sports day, that our players were 1.5 times more likely to meet the physical activity guidelines. Again, we're seeing a really, really positive contribution of Gaelic football there on a sports day, 1.5 times more likely. In season results, then we're going to look at similar results. So the percentage that met the physical activity guidelines, what did we find, males versus females? What we actually found was that females increased the amount of activity they were doing during the in-season period, and this ended up equaling the amount of activity that males are doing. So 54% of males met the physical activity guidelines, and this time around 49% of females met the physical activity guidelines, equaling, kind of having similar amounts of males and females meeting the guidelines. So that's a massive improvement for females there. Really interesting finding. We also actually found similar findings within our physical activity levels during Gaelic football section. So for a training session, we now found that females increased the amount of activity they did during training sessions, and now had an equal amount to males, 56% of time for males versus 54% of time for females spent in MVPA during training sessions. Same again then was found for matches. Males increased their activity again, where we can now see that males have an equal amount to females, 62% of MVPA, of time spent in MVPA, versus now 61% of time spent in MVPA for females. So again, males are equal to females now during this in-season results. So females are really improving across the season, which is an interesting finding. Unfortunately, again, though, we did find that both males and females were spending more time in MVPA during matches and training sessions, so not achieving the same intensity during training sessions. Again, we can see it there, 56% versus 62% for males, and 54% versus 61% for females. But that's something that we can look at a little bit more detail. Finally then, the contribution of physical activity levels. What did we find? We found that on a sports day versus non-sports day, again, that they were actually this time around 2 times more likely to meet the physical activity guidelines on a sports day. So they actually increased the contribution of Gaelic football during the in-season results. So they're around between 1.5 to 2 times more likely to meet the guidelines on a sports day overall, which is a really great finding. So our key findings, what do we find overall? First one is that female football players increased their physical activity levels across the season. They increased their time during training sessions, during matches, which is a really great finding. And this had a knock-on effect then by increasing their daily physical activity levels overall in during the in-season period, which is a good finding too. Secondly, then, we also know now that Gaelic football makes a positive contribution to youth physical activity levels, being 1.5 to 2 times more likely to achieve the guidelines on a sports day, which is a good finding too. And this actually resulted in males and females having equal amounts of physical activity during the in-season, which goes against all previous research that we found. So we can show now that Gaelic football makes a positive contribution there. However, though, unfortunately, despite this, still between 40 to 77% of players did not meet the guidelines, depending on the time of the season. So there's still room for improvement there. A large percentage of players aren't meeting the guidelines regularly. 3 then is players are not training at match intensity. As we've seen before, players spend between 6 to 11% more time in MVPA during matches than during training sessions. So we're not really training at match intensity. But there is, however, an opportunity to increase MVPA during Gaelic football training sessions. So when we looked at the MVPA levels, we can also tell then that 43 to 58% of training session time is actually spent being kind of inactive, so spending standing or in light intensity physical activity. So by reducing the amount of time that's spent in standing or in LIPA and replacing that with time spent in MVPA, we can increase the health benefits of playing Gaelic football, which is a massive benefit. So that leads us to, our research questions. How can time spent in MVPA during Gaelic football training sessions be increased? How do we increase these MVPA levels? So what we're going to do is, hopefully, we think the best way to use or to improve PA levels during training sessions is the use of a games-based approach. So I suppose within the research, we know there's 2 different types of kind of most commonly used approaches for coaching. And the first one is going to be a traditional approach. So I suppose traditional approaches usually use a lot of training form activities. So that would be a use of a lot of drills in isolation, maybe focusing on kicking or hopping or soloing, that sort of stuff. And they don't use games as much. They maybe leave games till later on in the season. They also follow a linear structure. So they use a lot of drills and skills first to try to develop them earlier on in the session and they focus on a lot of repetition of skills early on. And then hopefully trying to use them later on in the session in a game at the very, very end to try to use those skills in a game set. And they're also what we call coach-centered. So the coach provides a lot of direction to the players, tell them where to go, what to do, and what to do with each drill. Whereas a games-based approach instead then uses more playing form activities. So that's the use of a lot more games versus drills. So there's a lot more games being used throughout the session. It has a non-linear structure, it's more flexible. So the game is usually the starting point of the session. Start with a game, throw in different conditions that you might use. You want to try focus on attacking or defense. And there's a lot more focus on decision making of the players. And then it's also player-centered. So what I mean by that is that the coach provides an opportunity for the players to answer questions, maybe get them thinking about certain situations, and it provides an opportunity for dialogue between the players themselves. And what we found within the research is that game-based approach actually has a number of benefits over a traditional approach. So it has a benefit on decision-making, skill development, motivation and enjoyment, and it also has improvement on physical activity levels, which is great. That's what we want to use, we want to look at. And we understand there's some really brilliant coaches throughout the country coaching within the LGFA, and they might use a mixture of a traditional approach and a games-based approach, and that's perfectly fine. But we wanted to just see if a games-based approach in total could have a knock-on benefit of increasing physical activity. So that's what we're going to do. So that's what's next. So we want to design, implement a games-based approach coach education program. So what are we going to do? Our aim here is to, I suppose, educate coaches on a games-based approach using this education program, how to be confident to use it, how to implement it. And we also want to see, does it increase the players' physical activity levels, obviously. We also want to see, does it increase the skill development? And we want to see, does it increase decision making? So how are we going to design this games-based approach coach education program? What's involved? So there's going to be 2 phases. The first phase I'm currently at is phase 1 is the design of it. So we want to design this coach education program. And what we're going to do here is, and I'm currently interviewing coaches, players, and coaching games managers. So I didn't want to go away and design a coach education program without talking to people who are actually out there implementing on the grass, coaching with these players. And we want to get the coaches and players ideas, opinions on what they like doing, what they don't like doing, how they like to train, how they don't like to train, and take that information and help us design something that would actually be useful and beneficial to them. We've also designed a coach survey that's going to be brought out in the new year. It's in collaboration with the GA and LGFA, and it'll be on their social medias. If you see it in the new year and you're a youth club level coach, we'd like you to fill it out. And that's just going to ask you some questions on what do you currently do? Do you do warm-ups? What sort of drills do you use? What sort of games do you use? And get an idea of what's currently being used out there and help us use that to design our program as well. And finally, at the end, we want a coach education program. We don't know exactly what that's going to be just yet, but we think it could be, a workshop, and maybe some one-to-one mentoring where a coach can go out with a person who is very developed and has good knowledge of a games-based approach and help them out how to design sessions. And we also maybe will provide them with some resources. So that might be, providing them with a book of games, a book of ideas to use in different scenarios, that sort of stuff. So that's what this coach education program might be. And finally, then our second phase is going to be implementation phase. We want to put this into practice with some coaches and see if it works. Does this actually work improving physical activity levels? So what we're going to do is we're going to grab one LGFA coach and one GA coach, so of a boy and girls team under 16. We're going to implement this coach education program for around 6 to 12 weeks, using the workshop, the mentoring, whatever it may be. And we're going to measure its impact. So does it have an impact on the physical activity levels? Does it improve it over time? Does it improve their skills? Does it improve the enjoyment? Does it improve the enjoyment of the players and the coach? And our coaches, more confident in using a games-based approach, are more confident to design their sessions themselves. And hopefully at the end of it, then we'll have a really, a well-made coach education program. And if it is, it may be run in the future with the LGFA. We never know. So hopefully that's our aim goal of our next stage of our research. So again, that's kind of it. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed my presentation and you enjoyed the research we're currently doing, and hopefully if you are a acute club level coach and you see the survey online in the new year, I'd be delighted if you could fill it out and help us design something, and hopefully it's have a benefit for you in the future. And again, if you want to send me an email at k.gavin@research.ait.ie or follow me on Twitter at Kevin_Gavin9, and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. So again, thanks for listening, and thank you.